Now we will look at 19th centuries of language teaching. Evolution of language teaching methods had been due to the varied learning requirements. Changes in theories reflect needs adjustment. Changes in language teaching methods throughout history have reflected recognition of changes in the kind of proficiency learners need. We have just discussed different schools of thought, and each and every school of thought has proposed multiple manners in which language can be acquired and the impact it can have on the learning processes. Now, looking at the impact, different teaching models have been introduced, they have been developed, and it is important to look at some of the important models that have emerged during these 19th centuries, and starting from the very first model, which is known as the classical model. In the Western world, in 17th, 18th and 19th century, this model became very popular, and it was formed out of the necessity. Actually, it was related to Latin and Greek, and Latin and Greek, they both supported the speaker's intellectuality. So a model which can actually work on this particular aspect, which is the development of intellectuality. Then we see that the last 2 decades of the 19th century, we saw 2 different models. One is known as series model, introduced by Francois Guin. Series model was basically consisted of series of connected sentences. It did not gain popularity, and then it was replaced by the direct model, which was introduced and developed on the basis that the first language or the second language should be acquired in a similar manner in which the first language is learned. So how these models were developed? They do have their basis from different schools of thought. So under this module, we will just focus on these couple of models, and then we will discuss the remaining in the next module. So under this module, we will just look at the classical method, grammar translation method, and the rest we will discuss in the next module. The classical method, as I have just explained, that in the Western world, foreign language learning in schools was synonymous with the learning of Latin or Greek. Latin was taught by means of what has been called the classical method. Locus on grammatical rules, memorization of vocabulary and of various declension and conjugation, translation of text, doing written exercises. So these were the focus of this classical method. As other languages began to be taught in educational institutions in the 18th and 19th centuries, the classical method was adopted as the chief means of teaching foreign language. Little thought was given at that time to teaching oral use of language, as languages were not being taught primarily to learn oral communication, but to learn for the sake of being scholarly. So the intellectual aspect was something which was of paramount importance. Then for gaining reading proficiency in foreign language, that was something which was highlighted. On the acquisition of reading proficiency, foreign languages were taught as any other skill was taught. So language teaching before the 20th century is best captured as something like tradition. Late in the 19th century, the classical method came to be known as grammar translation method. There was little to distinguish grammar translation from what had gone on in foreign language classrooms for centuries, beyond a focus on grammatical rules as the basis for translating from the second to the native language. But the grammar translation method remarkably withstood attempts to outset of the 19th century to reform language teaching methodology, and to this day it still remains a standard methodology for language teaching in educational institutions. Prater listed the major characteristics of grammar translation as: number 1, classes taught in the mother tongue, little use of second language. Number 2, much vocabulary taught in the form of list of isolated words. Number 3, elaborate explanation of the intricacies of grammar. Number 4, reading of difficult classical text begun early 5. Then number 5, texts treated as exercises in grammatical analysis. Number 6, occasional drills. And number 7, little or no attention to pronunciation. Grammar translation is so popular that one of the reasons is that it requires few specialized skills on the part of teachers. Tests of grammar rules and translations are easy to construct and can be objectively scored. Many standardized tests of foreign languages still do not attempt to tap into communicative abilities, so students have little motivation to go beyond grammar, analogies, translations, and rote exercises. The criticism by Richard Rogers, as far as this method is concerned, is that it is a method for which there is no theory, there is no literature that offers a rationale or justification for it, or that attempt to relate it to the issue of linguistics, psychology, or educational theory. So Richards and Rogers' criticism says that this particular model simply lacks literature or rationale or justification, and there is no educational theory to support this particular method. To conclude, the historical perspectives of teaching methods address the concerns that how to teach foreign languages with innovations to best suit the learner's learning needs.